Hi everyone, the following video is a recording of the Underwater Photography 101 workshop held within the MetaJungle Discord on March 23rd. This session was hosted by talented photographers Shinto and Ryan Sault. This was a very fun and informative workshop with lessons on diving 101, different gear used in underwater photography, techniques, wide lens versus macro photography, and lighting. We want to thank Ryan and Shinto for providing this wonderful workshop and valuable information to the MetaJungle community, and we hope you find it useful. So with that, let's go on ahead and dive in.
Welcome everyone. This is Underwater Photography 101. My name is Shinto and Ryan is also with me. So we just wanted to have a very casual session where we can introduce some of the basics and like we get a lot of questions, at least I get a lot of questions during the spaces, how we shoot underwater, what equipments we use, and what is the difference shooting in a land and going underwater. So I thought it would be a good opportunity for us to share these with the community. And since we also have the recording, it might be useful to give just the reference. Like anyone who's asking in a space, you can ask, yeah, just go check out the MetaJungle recording. We have the whole session planned there. But yeah, we wanted to talk about like what basics, what we can cover, like what are the techniques and what mistakes we usually make. And then at the same time, like how do we make an actual photo? How do we change an actual photo into a story or a um, like a behavior or like marine environment? Like how do we showcase what is actually happening underwater? Um, But that being said, my name is Shinto. I'm from India, but I currently live in Singapore. I am a dive master. I do quite a lot of photography. I've been shooting from 2015. That's when I got my first camera. I'm really passionate about underwater world. Like I every time I get a chance, like before at least COVID, I used to travel every other weekend because Singapore sits right at the center of Southeast Asia, and it's super easy to travel to a lot of destinations, world-class diving here. But COVID got me stuck here, and then after like last 2 years, I've been shooting only Singapore, which is probably the least famous for diving. And then we have like super murky waters and low visibility and everything else. Um, but it's at the beginning it was quite challenging and I was not able to find good subjects. But then over time it became interesting and it became more of an adventure trip. Um, I've been like at least every other weekend. Right now, we just hang out. Like I go with my friends, and then just we go to some of these small local islands. And then just we go on mostly on shore dives where we just walk from the beach, or like we park the boat very close to the beach and just walk to the reef, and then we do a muck dive. What I mean by muck dive is we just go down and then just go with the torch and then just search the seafloor. uh, these are not deep part of the ocean. Singapore, probably we have like 20 meters of depth. But yeah, that's what we do. The problem these days is the visibility is not that great compared to rest of tropical paradises around us. But it's good for macro stuff. There's a lot of tiny critters and like there's a lot of small fish hanging around in this part of the reef. So we go search for them and shoot quite a lot of macro. Um, but yeah, that's about me, Ryan.
Sure. Well, my name's Ryan Salt. I'm obviously an underwater photographer. I've been diving for 20 odd years now and taking photos for at least 10 of those. Love being in the water with manatees, manta rays, seals, sharks. Not something everyone can say. And I really love talking about underwater photography and underwater creatures and animals. So I guess that's what's brought me here today. And before we get stuck into this, I'd just like to say a quick thanks to MetaJungle for hosting this. I absolutely love what they're doing and the community that they are building. as well as thanks to everyone that's joined us or is listening into this stream. Thank you very much, guys. We really appreciate it. Shinto, how do you want
so
to do
we
this
are.
day?
So no, you want to give an introduction to the Wildlife Collective and how we started and how we met actually?
Sure. So I am obviously a member of the NFT community, and I have been for quite some time. Back in July, I noticed that there wasn't a huge amount of wildlife photographers in the community, and we were really battling against digital photographers and um, landscape photographers and generative artists. So we decided that we would gather together all of the wildlife photographers and as a form of mutual promotion. And at that point in time, I think there was a whole 12 of us. Yeah, think about that number and compared to how many there are now, which is pretty astonishing to think about. But soon as we got together as a group, we found out that we all have similar interests, and we formed friendships very quickly and decided that we had mutual interests. We might want to make something a little bit more of this than just promoting ourselves. So we decided we would promote wildlife in general in the NFT community, as well as ethical wildlife photography, and as well as giving back to the wildlife that we take from. So through the forms of charity. The Wildlife Collective is now has a Twitter account, a Discord, and a virtual gallery. We recently successfully run a charity event that raised about 2.5 ETH for critically endangered orangutans, and we're now expanding. And as part of that, we want to include everyone in this group, like in the Wildlife Collective. However, having one huge big gallery that just serves all of wildlife is a little hard. I'm not sure it'd be very coherent either. So we decided we might break it down a little bit. And we are opening up smaller groups like the Ocean Tribe, for instance, which is a group of ocean photographers or ocean-based photographers, mainly underwater, that have come together in a little chat group. So yeah, Shinto, do you want to explain a little bit more about the Ocean Tribe? And yeah, let's get stuck into this.
Yeah. So yeah, like we don't want to explain a lot, but just to give an Ocean Tribe idea, like we are just, I think it's about 25 photographers right now, mostly underwater photographers. We also have some ocean like wave photographers and surf photographers. What we do is just chat in a group. It's a really fun group. It's probably the only I'm part of like a bunch of after joining NFTs. I'm part of a lot of chat groups, but this is probably one of those groups where I'm really active because the guys are really fun. Um, it's a lot of banter. It's a lot of and the great thing what we did we actually recently launched a gallery on Cyber Gallery like a month back, and it's nice. It's ironic that the MetaJungle was actually our host for the drop party, and it was a great success, I would say. But it's a place where anyone who's interested in ocean or who has any kind of interest towards the conservation of ocean or like well-being of these marine animals. We all just came together, and then we are just slowly growing. So we're quite active on Twitter and Discord. So feel free to check out the Ocean Tribe and the Wildlife Collective. Both are great, and if you're a photographer or a wildlife photographer in particular, you guys won't be disappointed. But yeah, that being said, that's a long introduction. Let's get into diving. Um, so talking about diving, it's a very common question what I get, that do I need to know swimming to go diving? The answer is yes and no. If you don't know swimming, if you have absolutely no experience, you can still do a dive. It's called a Discover Scuba Dive, or like a try diving session, depends on where you go. What happens is an instructor or a certified professional will be carrying you. Like he will be taking care of all your equipments and safety and like planning for the dive. Everything will be taken care by the instructor, and then you will be doing a tandem jump. You will be just attached to him. He will be holding you. for the entire 30-40 minutes, and then you can just enjoy what you see. That's the yes answer. But in reality, like if you want to be a diver, you definitely need to know swimming. So that's out of the question now. You need to know at least, I think it was 200 meters. You need to know swimming. And you have to swim 200 meters without stopping. That's just a very basic question which I get. So I thought I'll make that clear in the beginning. But when you talk about diving, there's quite a lot of organizations like PADI, SSI, CMAS. I mean, these are just few of them. There's a ton of others which I couldn't include. They are just the top four, I would say, or maybe not, but they are just the biggest organizations which provide these international dive certifications. So if you want to be an open water diver, which is the first level of diving, you need to go under a training where they will teach you like how to handle your equipment, how to take care of your safety, and how do you dive properly, and how to set your buoyancy correct. So all this is really important if you really want to continue in diving. So that's like it's probably a 4 to 5 days course, the open water diver course. And then once you have that, you are eligible to dive up to 18 or 20 meters with your certified buddy. Like we always do diving with in a buddy pair. It can be either your own dive buddy, or it can be like let's say someone who's certified, like who's a dive guide. Then after that, if you still want to go deeper, or if you want to improve your dive skills, you can always take further courses. You can go for an advanced open water course where you will be increase your depth limit by 30 to 40 meters. So you can go deeper. You can explore those dive sites where you need to go deeper. So that's the advantage. And then also it's fun. Like the more deeper you go, it gets better. I mean, yeah, actually, it's not true. All the colors are in the surface. But yeah, it's just a way of improving your diving, and it makes you a better diver. So that's probably the end of a recreational dive, or the certifications you need to just do a become a recreational diver. Once you have the advanced open water, you can pretty much go anywhere else in the world to do dive. Then if you want to continue the path, like if you want to be a professional, you can still do things like rescue diver, dive master, or even become an instructor and then start teaching kids. So that's like very basic about diving. So yeah, you can find these organizations almost everywhere in the world. They have they've been active for so many years now. So it's always easy to find a dive center near your house. But that's the boring part about diving. Let's get into the interesting side.
Just a quick
One,
warning for
yeah.
everyone out there too. Diving is very addictive. So once you dip beneath the waves, you're gonna want to do it again. So just be prepared for that.
It's true. And also it's expensive. That is another challenge with diving too. So yeah, it can take you to the places where you otherwise won't really go. And yeah, it's really addictive. So this is probably how we all started diving. I'm not sure how Ryan, how you started, but like for me, I actually went on a Discover Scuba dive in Muscat, Oman. Uh, I was on a business trip, and then my client actually took us on just a dive trip, and then it just blew my mind. I was like super interested in all the marine documentaries, and like I used to watch all the Blue Planet and Nat Geo documentaries before that, and also had like a really beautiful, not really beautiful, but like an aquarium at home. Actually, a couple of aquariums at home, because yeah, I was super fascinated about fishes and like all the things which lives underwater. But then when I went for my first dive, I realized whatever you have seen in all those documentaries are actually real. It's not something staged. It's super colorful. I cannot explain it. So this is another problem which I get, or like any divers, it's really hard to explain to a non-diver or anyone who has not seen the world underwater how colorful it is, because you see some of those colors which I have never seen before on the land. So yeah, it's way better down there. So that's one reason why we dive. This was a shot which I took in Maldives. We were diving on a reef, and it was really shallow. You can actually see like the waves on the surface. So this sea turtle, I think it's a hawksbill. He was just like like it was moving with the swell. It was really interesting. Like it's a way better place. I mean, you get to be really calm, and you can just move with the turtle and then take these photos. So that's one reason why I do underwater photography. I I want to show I want to show the world what is beneath there. And then I've heard this term like in so many places, like without generating the interest, there is no conservation. So if we want to protect something, let it be Amazons or let it be the reefs of Maldives, you need to generate some interest in the people. Like if, so that's something which I feel which I'm honored that I'm doing. Like I like to share whenever there is an opportunity. I like to share my photos and show them, okay, yeah, this is the stuff down there. You guys should go see it. But yeah, that's one reason why we do diving. And since we are on the topic of conservation, I also wanted to like touch up on some core ethics of like the Ocean Tribe and the Wildlife Collective here. Like we 100% every one of us, we believe in ethical photography. So what I meant by that is like we don't want to harm any animals or anything underwater or even on the land to, for the purpose of taking any photos. So you need to be very buoyant, like you need to be. So this is when I was teaching photography, I was always telling my students, you need to be a better diver even before thinking about buying a camera. So like it, it it makes a lot of difference in terms of like whether you will be hitting the corals and breaking them, or you will be like lying down on the corals without considering they are also living animals. So it's really important for me or anyone else which I have talked to in the spaces or like over Twitter. Like it's really important to bring up that ethical photography subject. Uh, so yeah, that being said, we are moving forward. Why we go down? It's way better, and I wanted to show that world. And it also gives you a different perspective. What I meant by that is this shot was taken during a night dive. So we not only just dive during the sunny days, we also go down to these same reefs during the nights as well. You get to see different animal behaviors when you're doing a night dive. Uh, some of these animals, like cephalopods or moray eels in this photograph, or even reef sharks, they become they become hunters during the night, and then the reefs become a really active place during the night. So it gives you a lot more perspective that you're actually that you have never seen before. So like in this case, it was a night dive, and then we were so I actually have a funny story about this dive. Like it was my first night dive. Um, then it was on an island called Gili in Indonesia, and then I was diving, and then I was scared since it was the first night dive. I was scared in the beginning. It was pitch dark for the first 5 minutes. Your eyes won't adapt to anything, and then once I started seeing things, the coral life or the reefs become really colorful, and then we started moving, and then there was a creek, and I didn't see this creek, and then we like right at the creek, I just turned left and I realized there's a moray right next to me. And then I got scared. And this guy's so scary looking, but they are like very friendly animals. They're not scary in real reality. They're not scary at all. But yeah, the eel got scared. I got scared. Everyone got scared. but yeah, it just went inside the hole. But it was a funny story to share. But yeah, it gives you a different perspective when you're going down with the camera. You get to see things which otherwise you would have missed. Another thing I wanted to mention before we start the actual presentations was like I asked our friends in Ocean Drive to send out their photographs to present uh, during the session. So they were really happy to share some of their shots. So this one, what you see is a nori prime. Um, they're they're very close relatives to our garden slugs, what we see on land. But I have never seen anything colorful like this in my garden or any gardens. So the third reason why we go down with the camera is like it makes you a better diver, and it show you things which otherwise you would have missed. In this case, these are like really tiny animals. They are on the like maybe like 2-3 centimeter long. And then if you're diving without a camera, if you're diving without that photography purpose, you would clearly miss it because you're looking for big animals, big fishes, big sharks, and then you might not even see them. So going down with the camera definitely gave me a perspective which otherwise I would have clearly missed. So this is two of like really beautiful photographs from Alex, and he's a great photographer out in Bali. But yeah, that's about the icebreaker part. That's like I wanted to show you guys some photographs and make you jealous before we start getting into the boring part.
Quickly,
Right.
is a matter of scale. How big are these two nudies? Just as a finger in the air.
Uh, I'm I'm guessing these are about 3 centimeter long, but they can get really small. 3 centimeters is actually a big size for nudibranch, and they can go like I have seen nudibranchs. I'll show you later in the slide. I have seen nudibranchs which are in millimeter size, like 1 or 2 millimeter, the size of a sand grain. But yeah, but it's fun to find them and then shoot them. And yeah, it's same with the macro in land as well. When you shoot something really tiny and then you nail the focus and then you nail everything, you get a different kind of satisfaction than a big shot photo for me. But
I
yeah,
do agree
let's
that
get it.
it makes you slow down and really look at the finer details in things. I reckon it's very cool.
Thanks, man. And yeah, let's talk about gear now. So you see the dollar sign on the mask? It's there for a purpose. These things are really expensive. Uh, Probably the housing for your camera will cost more than your camera itself. So when I talk about underwater photography, let's lay down the challenges what we face. The first one, of course, we need to have a camera. Like yeah, any camera will do, whether it's your action camera and compact camera or your DSLR, everything is yeah, that's good enough to cover that challenge. But the main challenge when you're doing underwater is how do you protect your camera from the pressure, from the salt water? As we all know, salt water is not a great friend for any of your electronic equipment, and you need some proper cover for that. So that's when these housings come into picture. So if you see, like in the first photo, it's a GoPro on the right, and then it has like GoPros usually can go down up to 5-6 meters without having any housings. But if you want to take it deeper, you need to have a plastic housing, or you need to have a housing which protects it from actually the pressure and then salt water getting inside. Um, on the second photo, that one is a compact camera. And yeah, the bigger your camera gets, your housings also gets bigger. So like every camera, like the housing also provides another thing, which is the button mapping. Like any button on your camera need to be mapped on your housing as well. So like if you want to change any settings, if you want to adjust something on your photograph, that's that's where your housing come into picture. Like you can control every single settings on your camera just from your housing. So you have your front element, and on the back it's all clear, so you can see your viewfinder or your screen, LCD screens, and then you can shoot the subjects. Then the second one, it's a Fantasia housing designed for Canon G7X. Then it can get bigger. So this one, the third one, is actually my camera. Actually, all three of them I used to own at some point. The third one is DSLR housing. So DSLR housings get even more complex. When I said complex, it's because you know the cameras are complex. So you have your camera body, and then you have the lens. So how do you cope up with that in a camera? In a housing, you have like two main elements. Like you have your housing itself for the body, and then you also have the lens port. So the black part on the front is the lens port, which you can change according to whichever lens you're using. In this image, I'm using a 90mm macro lens, and then that's this one. Ryan usually shoots with a wide angle lens, so you have something called a dome port. We will come to that. So I'm currently shooting with my Sony a7 III, which goes inside this housing designed by Isota. But yeah, it's super easy to, once you get the hang of it, it's easy to handle underwater. It's because you have every buttons, every knobs, every lever, every joysticks are mapped on this housings as well. So you have the button which the moment you press the shutter on the housing, it actually maps into your camera. So that's how we overcome the first challenge of how do we take the camera underwater. The next challenge what we have is the light. So the biggest light, the biggest light what we can get when you're shooting a subject underwater is definitely the sunlight. So if you're someone who is shooting within the first 5 meters, or maybe like you can stretch up to like 10 meters, and it's on a sunny tropical place, your sunlight will give you ample of lights to light up your subject. So if you're planning to do a snorkeling, or if you're just doing a free diving and then just shooting some whales or pod of dolphins, you probably don't need any artificial lights. The sun will, as far as it's on the right direction, sun will definitely give you enough light to light up your animals. So that's probably the biggest light or the most powerful light you're going to get. But the physics come into play when you go down. The deeper you go, so water is definitely more dense than the air. What happens with this is, like, the deeper you go, the water starts absorbing some of the colors from your sunlight. The deeper, so it starts from red. So like anything below 5 meters, you won't see the color red. Then the deeper you go, it starts absorbing more and more shades of red, like orange and yellow. By the time you hit like 30 meters, all you will see is like different shades of gray and blue, and then a lot of black. So it kind of get muted around 30 meters. It doesn't mean the reef is not colorful. It doesn't mean the fishes are not colorful. They're super colorful, but it's just that the sunlight is not reflecting on them, and it's not reflecting on the same way on the surface. So how do we adjusting, or how do we overcome this challenge, is by taking an artificial strobe or a continuous light. What I mean by that, on the left side, you can actually see an artificial strobe. Artificial light, which is the strobe. So these are really powerful flashlight. You can compare it with the strobes, which is the speed lights, which we use on the land. It's exactly same function, but built like a tank for the underwater pressure and the depths. So it's exactly the same, and it just produces very powerful flash of lights, which will help us to light up these bigger areas. You can also use continuous lighting, which is similar to a video light, what we see on the surface. You can see it on the center and the right, the black color ones. They are the artificial continuous lightings. It's a torch, basically. But if you just want to shoot like a very smaller area, you can always use these continuous light is, and then you can actually see in your camera how your photos look while you're shooting. But yeah, that's pretty much. And but how do you carry all this thing is using your accessories. What I meant by that is the red things. What you're seeing on the right, they are the arms and the clamps, which will actually attach these lights and the torches onto your housing itself. So your camera goes inside the housing, and this arms will get attached to the housing, and then the lights will get then attached to the arms. So it's kind of get complex when you go down. It can get like probably around 5-6 kilograms, but ocean gives a very good support while you're diving. You don't really feel the weight underwater. But that's usually my macro setup. That's usually how I go down when I'm shooting just macro. If I'm shooting wide angle, then it get a little bit heavier than that. But yeah, that's about my setup. Ryan, do you want to talk about your housing, and then we can move on to the next one?
I can quickly touch on my housing. It's not a lot different than yours. I have the huge big housing. I have the strobe lights as well, though they are definitely different positioned than yours would be. We'll talk about that in a minute. But on the front, I have a huge big perspex dome, which is about 8 inches in diameter. And the reason you have that is to avoid distortion on the edges of your wide angle photo. The larger the dome, the less the distortion. Unfortunately, it's not perfect, so an underwater photo is going to have much softer edges, especially in comparison to some of the newest lenses for terrestrial photography. But the larger your dome port, the better off that is. So that's generally why you have this huge, big perspex, fragile thing on the front of your underwater camera. Just to quickly step back, I do want to emphasize, because this is a question I get asked probably the most, is what underwater camera should I get in order to get into underwater photography? And honestly, it's an impossible question because I simply don't have enough information to answer it. So I generally respond with the best camera is the one that you have. And that sounds really corny, but it's really true. You can get some incredible photos on just a simple plastic housing on your phone these days, and taking that a meter or two under the water. An action camera will get you some amazing photos. If you want to go a bit more complex, you can get a point and shoot, or you can go head first and dive right in and get a DSLR. Each has its own advantages and disadvantages. Generally, the lower end, you have your action cams are relatively cheap. I say relatively, but relatively cheap. They're also very simplistic. They're lightweight, they're small, they're easy to travel with, and they're simple to use. So they're particularly good for beginners. If you're not a confident diver, you don't want to be playing with a monstrous big DSLR camera and all these like these ridiculous array of buttons and lightings, etc., etc. What you want to be able to do is click a button and then hold your hand around, point it around, and get some nice footage and some nice videos. So very good for beginners and a great entry point. If you're looking to go a bit more advanced, you can get a point and shoot camera and an appropriate housing. Again, these will get you some incredible photos. They have a bit more flexibility. They'll be able to get you some macro shots as well as some wide angle shots. You can even attach lights to some really nice point and shoot cameras and get some incredible photos. Bit more expensive. They're also a lot heavier and a bit more complex to use. They're still respectably to travel with. You still can pack these things up and take them on your dive holidays without too much issues. So that's a nice middle point if you want to get into underwater photography. If you want to dive right in, you can go a DSLR camera. Just keep in mind that they're very costly. They're very heavy. They're very difficult to travel with. Just imagine packing all of these things up and trying to travel with them. They're also very complex, so your dive will consist of underwater photography. That's what you'll be diving for. You won't be diving necessarily, you'll still enjoy it hopefully, but you won't be diving pleasure diving, you'll be diving for underwater photography. That's an important thing you need to understand. Once you get to this level, you will start to dive purely for photography, which is a good and a bad thing. As long as you enjoy it, it's a great and incredibly fun thing. Just keep that in mind. More complex you go, the more expensive, the more issues, the more hassles, the more dedicated to diving, and the more expensive that it's all going to be. So you need to pick where on the spectrum that you want to end up. And honestly, I always recommend start at the beginning, buy something simple, see if you enjoy it. If you do, start to step your way up through them. The other thing that I go to point out is that we've talked about the camera that we need. Just keep in mind that you're also going to need a respectable laptop in order to edit your photos and, of course, editing software. And in reality, eventually all underwater photographers are going to need their own scuba gear. There's a lot of reasons for that, mostly because eventually it's going to become more economical, but more importantly, you're going to be more comfortable under the water in your own gear. You're going to know where all of your things are on your BCD, where your pockets are. You're going to be able to streamline your equipment. So to make sure there's no hoses in the way that are going to snag on your underwater camera, make sure that there's nothing going to drag on the bottom and stir things up. You've got everything tucked away. When it's streamlined, you're also going to use less air because you're pushing yourself through the water. It's going to be less, it's going to be more energy efficient. And you can also shed weight and get rid of as much as you possibly can, which will improve your buoyancy, which is absolutely critical for underwater photography. The better your buoyancy is, the better your photos are going to be, and the more you're going to enjoy it. So I guess that's what I would like to add in regards to gear. Back to you, Shinto.
Yeah, we are on backscatter.
Backscatter.
Yeah, so we have all set up all the gear. We got your first gear, we got your camera, you got your light, and then you go down, you wait for that particular subject, and then you shoot. Then suddenly all your photos looks like this on the left. So this one
I know this
is
wasn't
actually
taken in Canada snowing.
it looks like snowing, but it is actually not. This is called backscatter, and it is a really common thing in underwater photography. There was it's called a Doto sea slugs. It's a very rare subject to find in anywhere else, but here in Singapore we have these guys are occasional visitors during the colder months. I mean, when I say colder, it's still 80 degrees, 85 degrees. So so it's but still. So this is actually nowadays it's actually the good time for finding dodos. I went down, I started shooting. This was during one of my earlier dives. I shot, and then every shot looks like this. Everything, everywhere, there's a lot of particles. There's things everywhere. So this is called a backscatter. What happens is, as I said earlier, water is way dense, especially the ocean water. It has a lot of particles in it. There's a ton of things between your camera and the subject, and there's a lot of things behind your subject. These are just moving particles. It can be silt, it can be plankton, it can be anything. So it's one of the biggest challenges what any underwater photographers get. The moment you flash something, or let's say it's your strobe or your continuous light, everything, not just your subject, but everything in between gets also lit up. So yeah, that's one of the biggest challenges what we face. And how do we avoid this is by using different positions of your strobe. Ryan, you want to explain a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I literally just clicked out of the display. So backscatter, obvious as you mentioned, Shinto, this is probably the photographer's worst enemy. Some more than others. I assume that it's much worse for you than it is for me when I'm in Australia, and again, much less for those in the Red Sea or anything with areas where it's particularly clear and there's not a lot of there's really high visibility. But essentially, we're talking about Small particulates, anything from sand and silt, which divers often kick up themselves or their fellow divers kick up from the sea floor. We have little phytoplankton and zooplankton, little small plants, little small animals, microscopic things that get in between you and your subject. When the light hits them, they turn bright white and ruin a photo very, very quickly. For for a wide angle photographer, the best thing to do with backscatter is to, well, get close, to eliminate as much water between you and the subject as possible. And I've got a slide on that in a little while where I'll talk a bit more about animal behavior, etc., etc. There's a lot of different things you can do in terms of strobe positioning, putting your strobes back and out wide in order to change where the beams hit your subject and ensure that the light doesn't hit the particles that are between you and your subject. That's the best way to eliminate it. But then if they hit the subject, they're also going to hit things behind your subject. So yeah, not an easy thing to deal with. Few different things. There's actually not much you can do about it in wide angle. In macro, Shinto, you've got a few more ways to eliminate it than I do.
Yeah, so in wide angle also, like it's really the when you think about the technique, it's really simple. You're trying to eliminate the subject with the edges of your beam. So like let's say if you're a portrait photographer on the land, or if you're in a studio when you're shooting someone, like you always know that you're actually hitting the person with the beam itself, like in the center of the beam where you get the best light with a diffuser or like whatever it is in front of it. But in underwater photography, is probably this the only place where we use this technique. We never use the center of our beam. We always use either the inner edges of the beam or the outer edges. Depends on how you want to create. Like in this case, I was shooting this one in India. Actually, this was probably the only very few photos which I have from India. And this is a Malabar grouper, if I'm not wrong. So I wanted to show the grouper with the background. So what I did is I put the strobes wide, a little bit wide from my housing, and then pointed it outwards instead of pointing it inwards and pointing it right to the subject. I point the strobes a little bit outwards, and then what it does, it's the strobes usually have around 100 to 120-degree beam angle. It eliminates a lot of things between your camera, as you see in the diagram. So like, let's say those bubbles in between your camera and the octopus is the backscatter, what we were talking about. If you put the strobes outwards, that part doesn't get eliminated. That doesn't give you a reflection. And it only reflects the subject. Like, let's say if you're perfectly pointing your strobes beams on the inner beams of your strobe towards the subject, so everything between is not eliminated, but everything behind the subject gets eliminated. Like you can see all the fish and you can see the school of million fishes behind that. But yeah, that's like the very basic technique what we use for wide angle. But when it comes to macro, it's a little bit easier because you're not lighting up a very big area. So what we like, let's say if we want to get the same area. So this shot was actually taken at the same place, exact same place, but this is a school of 3 batfish which were swimming around. So if you look at the diagram, what we does is we take the strobes onto the side of the housing and try to light up the same subject with the so we point the strobes actually towards the camera. This is probably in any other kind of photography, this is considered a taboo. This is not no-go. But like in underwater photography, what it does is it doesn't, like, let's say this light up the place between the camera and the subject, but it reflects the particles, like let's say in this between my camera and this batfish, if there was some particles in the water, it actually doesn't reflect on your lighting because it is pointing towards me. And then what you try to achieve is try to get the outer edge of the beam almost as horizontal as possible to your subject. So but like, let's say the disadvantage here is your subject, the background is always going to be black. because you're shooting in probably around 1/200th of the second or 1/250 of the second, depends on your strobe sync. But that gives you a really black background. Even if there is a dolphin swimming behind, you will not be seeing that. You will, because you're trying to go for these kind of photographs. This was like, let's say, a wide angle-ish photo, but if you want to do the same thing for a macro, it's actually even easier because you don't really have to have a lot of light in this case. Like even if you just have one torch light, or if you just have one strobe light, you're going to put that strobe light directly above the subject. Actually, the diagram is a little wrong, but like if it was me who's shooting, I will put the strobe right above the subject and put a little bit inwards, like point it a little bit inwards towards the camera. So what it does is it gives you a really clean background. In this case, it's a sea slug again, shot by Oliver. He's also great. He's one of the idols which I look up to. These guys shoot incredible macro. So yeah, this shot was it's a sea slug, and it was just sitting on a hydroid, and I don't want to. So usually when you're shooting macro, especially when you're shooting smaller subjects like these, you're shooting in a very messy environment. Like the background is always going to be a lot of backscatter. There's a lot of things happening, and then you actually want to eliminate that background by just giving a black screen. So this is usually the technique which I mostly use. I use a lot of like I try to experiment with my lights and my strobes positions. And like the other good thing with the macro is your subjects are usually not that fast. So sea slugs or nudibranchs or like crabs or shrimps, they don't usually move as fast as a dolphin or a shark. They sit very slow. I mean, they sit quiet most of the time, and then they don't really move. So it gives us ample of time. It gives us enough time to just play around with the light, and then yeah, just perfect your lightings. But that's two techniques. Like it depends on if you're shooting wide angle or if you're shooting however the subject is. You can adjust the size of your strobe arms, like how far you want your strobe lights need to be. But this is just two different techniques applied. Like you can experiment with this if you know the basics of this technique. You use your inner edge or outer edge to subject to light up the subject. But you can experiment with this with different ways. Like I can show you some of the techniques in the later slides. But yeah, that's about the strobes. That's about the lighting. That's about backscatter. That's about the gear, what we're talking about. Now, let's talk about something more interesting. Wide angle. Where
Yes.
is my...
So, well, where do we go for the crossover? So we haven't talked about macro yet, but everyone understands what it is. We're talking about things that are maybe your fist size or smaller. Wide angle, you're talking about things that are larger, but generally much larger, and things that move quite quickly, including these two big, beautiful creatures that we're looking at right now, including the world's largest fish, which is called a whale shark. I don't know why, but it is. It's a fish. And then two gorgeous whales and a little baby down there, which is stunning. Sorry, I'm just admiring these photos. I'm finding it hard to talk at the moment. They are stunning photos by Ocean Amy and Matt. So what do you want to talk about in wide angle? Where do we
How do
start?
you, like, usually what does it have to do with the visibility, or like how do you light up your subject? How do you go about these things?
Well, if we're talking about lighting, often you can't light your subject. For instance, these two images both look like they have no artificial lighting involved. They're all completely naturally lit. Now, that can be something that is particularly challenging because these two creatures are so huge. There's no scale, but the one on the left is probably the size of a school bus. The one on the right is probably a little bit larger than a school bus, and its little baby's just a little SUV or a pickup, just small. How do you light subjects like that? The other complication is, for instance, on the right, the two whales. These things are so large. If you remember back to one of the first slides, that the amount of color that transfers through the water changes every 10 meters or less. And you're looking at a creature that might be 30 meters long. So the colors that hit the top change as it goes down the actual the whale. And Matt's done a beautiful job with a little bit of editing, and still looks very realistic of how he's done the lighting on the one on the right. Looks stunning. But you see the tails obviously got to be a lot darker and a different, more bluish color, because at those kind of depths, blue's all that remains. But as you come to the surface, you get more light there. Yeah, two absolutely stunning photos. I could talk about these two for hours on end. Ocean Amy's, and I think that's a Matt crossover, isn't it? From
Yeah,
memory.
they did a collaboration. But
I
yeah,
love the
it
little
was
pack of remoras down there at the bottom of the whale shark. Very cool photo.
right.
So over to, we talked about gear that you require: scuba gear, underwater camera, your laptop, all those kind of things. There's a few other critical things you need for underwater photography and wide angle photography. So first and foremost, you need patience. Now that's kind of contradictory when you think about it, because when you're diving, you have a finite amount of air. You jump down and you might have an hour worth of air on your back, usually less. In some situations, when you're down at 30 or 40 meters, you might only have 10 minutes with your subject. How do you practice patience when you've only got 10 minutes with your subject? It's particularly challenging, and something that a lot of people struggle with when they first start out with underwater photography. They will see a subject and they'll go, "Oh, that's amazing." And they'll start swimming madly towards it, holding their camera out to try and close the distance between the two so they can get a nice photo. The problem is, and the best way that I think about this is that if you're a predator, you will chase or approach your prey. If you're prey, you will flee. So if you're approaching a subject, it thinks you might be a predator, or it might not know what you are, or whatever it is. It's likely to flee or move away from you, or just get the hell out of the area. You're likely to scare it off. And you just see this constantly with underwater photographers. The first thing they'll do is see a shark and they'll run straight for it, and the shark will disappear. Yes, you definitely can scare off a shark. They're very skittish in actual fact, amazingly skittish. I'm considering they're apex predators. But yeah, so the thing that you need most, or one of the things that you need most, is patience. You need to wait for that subject to approach you. So patience is key. There's also patience on the surface. You also need to wait for the right conditions, the right seas, etc., etc. That's where I struggle the most in underwater photography, because I don't have a lot of patience sitting on this, sitting around doing nothing. Anyway, so if you only have anywhere from an hour, or in some, actually nowhere near, if you only have 45 minutes to 15 minutes with a subject that might not want to approach you, you can't tell it how to pose, you can't tell it where to stand or where to go, how do you get that shot that you've envisaged in your mind? That comes down to the next point: persistence. If you don't get it the first time, you're going to have to go back, and you're going to have to go back again, again, and again until you capture that image that you really want, or that image that you have in your mind. So that brings the second thing that you need as an underwater photographer and as a wide angle photographer, is persistence. You need to keep going back in order to get those images. I'm not going to lie, sometimes you might jump in and a fate will be on your side and you'll be able to capture what you have in your mind. But others, for instance, there's one shot that took me about 50 dives to capture, because everything had to align all in one dive, and it just wouldn't. So I just had to keep going back again and again and again. But when that one moment does happen, when that animal does approach you, or in this particular photo that I'm looking at, a manta ray mating train uh, goes straight over the top of you, you want to be proficient. You want to know what you're doing. You want to have your camera on the right settings. You want to know what subject you're chasing. You want to know the shutter speed, the aperture, the ISO, your strobe's position right. You want to know what you're doing. So on that one occasion that they do, the stars align and everything happens for you, you want to be able to capture that photo. So proficiency is the other thing that you need as an underwater photographer. And that involves a lot of time and practice. Practicing above the water in photography in general is a huge benefit to when you go under the water. Practicing with your underwater housing and knowing all of the buttons and dials, which don't align necessarily with what they look like on the inside. Actually, most of them are completely different. So yeah, you need to be proficient in that, proficient in how to arrange your strobes and your lighting, what the correct lens to do is, etc., etc. Proficiency is key. So patience, persistence, and proficiency. How do you get all those things? Well, that's probably the biggest thing in underwater photography, is that you need to be having fun down there. Underwater photography is challenging. It's exceptionally challenging. It's costly. It requires huge amounts of time and effort. And if you're not having fun, then you're not going to build up enough dive experience to gain these other things that you require to be an underwater photographer. So you've got to be having fun down there. And if you're not, you need to stop, look at what you're not enjoying, and reassess and change that. If your housing's too big, maybe you move to a different camera or go back down. If you're not capturing the image qualities that you want, maybe you need to look at a different style of camera, etc., etc. But absolutely key, if you're not having fun in underwater photography, you're not going to last long, and you're not going to get good at it. So make sure you're having fun. Go out there and enjoy yourself. That's what we're all under the water for. So yeah, absolutely critical for it. Anything to add on that, Shinto?
No, I think you covered it really well. I was, yeah, it's just about like the patience itself is a really important things for me. I've had dives where I've gone down looking for manta rays in the same location again and again and again, but they were not there, usually on the cleaning station. And then some new dive group comes and then they just jump in on the first dive and then they find everything. So it's just there's a lot of luck involved. It's not just in underwater photography, but any kind of wildlife photography, I would say you need to have at least 50% of the luck to get that exact moment.
We've worked out we're eliminating that word from wildlife photography. We're not allowed to use luck. It's nothing about luck. If you're in the
Right.
water, that's completely different. You've taken the time, you've taken the effort, you've got the camera, you're in the water. If they happen to be there, then yeah, the stars have aligned. That's great. But you haven't got lucky. If you've managed to capture an image on one of the first tries, then you've had patience, you've had persistence, you've had proficiency, and you've had fun. You've got all the key requirements. Yeah, it's not luck. I don't like the word luck. I'm sorry, but yeah.
Yeah, you're right. But yeah, nothing else that he covered it really well.
Yeah, one of those frustrating things that I learned early in the Wildlife Collective, we'd have these spaces and you get someone come up and they'd look at this gorgeous image from the Masai Mara of a lion feeding or something along those lines, and someone would say, oh, you must have been very lucky. And you're like, well, no, hang on a sec. You're talking to a photographer that's been taking photos for 10 years, traveling to the Masai Mara twice a year, spending vast amounts of money and going on time and travel, etc., and expenses, etc., etc. They didn't get lucky with this shot. They put in the time, the effort. So same with underwater photography. One of my pet peeves. I'm sorry, you got me up on my soapbox. I went on a bit of a rant.
No, I'm with you. I'm with you on this one. But yeah, we can move to getting closer.
We should.
It's scary, man.
So the another huge thing you absolutely must do when you're an underwater photographer is get close. So as we were talking about before, backscatter is a huge issue, particulates between you and your subject. If you hit them with a light, they'll turn bright white. If you don't hit them with the light, there'll still be a black dot and still be an annoyance on your photo. And they're still going to affect the clarity of your image, as will the water between you and your subject. So the best thing to eliminate all that is to get close. Yes, you have to get close to sharks. You have to get close to your subjects. Now, how do you do that? Okay, so you know your subject. Animal behavior is absolutely key. How do you elicit a reaction from your subject, pique its interest, and get it to come over to you? Lots of different ways, and there's lots of different ways you can learn these techniques as well. You can do some reading and research before you go to your location, absolutely key. You can talk to other divers before you go down, absolutely critical. You can learn underwater, use your brain, absolutely critical as well. Every single subject is also going to vary and has different behaviors. In general, some things work for some subjects, some things don't work for others. So yeah, just learn, get down in the water. A few examples: seals and sea lions. Uh, they're very playful creatures. They're very, very curious, and they love to look at their own reflections. The one in the top right, he is literally maybe 3 or 4 centimeters away from my dome port. I'm almost bumping my camera on the sea lion's nose there, and it is sitting there staring at itself in its own reflection. Uh, Gorgeous creatures. Yeah, a little vain, obviously. If you have something shiny, or if you're doing something out of the ordinary, something stupid, the sea lions are likely to approach you. So it's quite hilarious being in a sea lion dive. Often you'll see divers doing somersaults and flips and twirls and shining things at the sea lions, trying to pique their interest and get them to come over and notice them. Sharks. Sharks are particularly interesting. Baiting is obviously the most easy, like one of the most prominent ways of capturing a shark's attention. You have hundreds of kilometers of sea around you in order to attract a shark to you so you can capture an image. When you have a very finite amount of time, often requires that you put a little chum in the water. That will get them hit their olfactory system. They'll smell it and they'll come over and follow that trail of chum to the boat. And then once they get there, then you've still got to get them close to you. And it's no real easy way to do this. Often there's people use baits. Baits is another thing. You can put a bait really close to the cage and the shark will come up to that. Piquing their interest again. The sharks can sense electrical signals in the water. When I say electrical signals, I mean fish's electrical signals. So the impulses they send down their spinal column to make their fins move. So tiny little electrical signals. Now you've got an underwater camera with you that's shooting off these huge big electrical signals to send out impulses to the strobes and light these things up. Your body is also moving and constantly sending out electrical signals as well. So these sharks often find interest in you. You also often, if you are in a cage, the cage is giving off signals. The boat itself is a huge thing of interest for these sharks that I've often spent hundreds or days out at sea with no stimulus. So yeah, they can come in and they pick their interest, so they'll approach you. Yeah, manta rays completely different again. Won't get into those, but anyway, know your subject and getting close is absolutely critical to wide-angle photography. The more space that you eliminate between you and your subject, the better. And for those, just to put a little perspective to that, I was reading through my camera housings manual the other day. Don't ask me why I was doing that. I don't read any manuals ever, but some weird little thing I do with underwater photography and cameras, I read the manuals. It was recommending 1.8 meters is the maximum you should be taking a photo from using a wide angle lens. So that gives you some idea of how close they think you should be to your subject. Obviously, that depends on a huge amount of variables, including water quality and clarity. but 1.8 meters is maximum. These two images much closer. So there is also putting wide angle photography and covering it in this small little workshop is near impossible, and all of the techniques, because it's so diverse. There's lots of different types of wide angle photography. The two images you've seen in the past, the previous slide, were both lit with strobe lights, and they were quite close to my subject. However, what do you do when you're at night? So night diving is another unique form of wide angle photography. So to capture this kind of image that's up on the screen now, you use what's called a focus light. And essentially it's a torch that lights your subject up just enough in order to allow your camera to grab focus. Because if your camera can't focus in the dark, so you need some light on your subject in order to light it up, let your camera grab focus, and then you have your two big strobes on the side that will ignite when you pull the trigger and light your subject up properly. Those video lights will provide some lighting. They might fill in a few shadows, which is nice. However, in general, their power is much, much less than those of the strobe lights. So very interesting. You can also use some, when I say, I wouldn't call it natural lighting, but you can use some other lighting. For instance, in this one, there's boats on the surface that have lights pointing down into the water. That's what they are in the background that give it a bit of a unique alien-like almost feel. Next one is natural lighting. So you don't necessarily need strobes for wide angle photography, as we spoke about with the whales and the whale sharks. However, you can do some nice silhouette images if you have a nice background. So this particular image, I went down on the bottom of the sea. I turned around and I pointed directly upwards, and I turned my strobe lights completely off, and I let this subject, this beautiful grey nurse shark, swim above me, and then I was shooting up in order to capture this silhouette. This is probably the most challenging image I've ever captured. A lot of fun to capture this one. Next one, some beautiful images by Noel and Fake Eye. These are called close focus wide angle images. So these ones essentially, you pretty much put your camera dome port on your subject within a centimeter or two. Generally, this is reserved for seascapes and smaller subjects. We're talking a macro, you might look at fist size and below. Close focus, you might look at fist size to maybe a bit above 2 or 3 basketball size. You'd use this kind of technique, and then you move into the wide angle technique. So this frogfish, I believe it is, on the left-hand side from Noel, his dome port will literally been pretty much touching this frogfish when he took this image, and he's got a nice little diver in the background to add a little bit more to this image, which is beautiful. Split photography, which is probably one of the most challenging types of underwater photography, where you capture an image above and below the water. The reasons that this is so challenging is there's a lot. Firstly, you've got to be able to balance on the surface and get your camera focused. Often the focus differs below and above the waves, so you've got to use the right technique in order to manage that. The dome port itself holds water, so when you lift your dome port out of the water, you can't just lift it up for a second and click the trigger and hope you're going to get a good image, because then you'll get massive big streaks of water coming down from the top. You need to be able to hold it in that position so it dries out a little bit in order to capture the image. That's just a number of the challenges with split images like this one. So huge admiration for Fake Eye capturing that one. It's a particularly challenging one. Seascapes as well is particularly cool when you capture like wide areas of coral and other amazing subjects under the water. Again, it needs to be reserved for the right settings. You need nice clear water. You need to be able to capture images of something that's 5 meters away. Well, you need to be able to see what's 5 meters away. So if you've got visibility of 5 meters, that's not going to happen. You probably want 20, 30, 40 meter visibility in order to capture a nice seascape. Few different types of wide angle I've talked about there. Don't want to talk about it too much because we've got to keep moving, but yeah. Anything you want to add there, Shinto?
Yeah, like so seascapes are usually the easiest way to start your wide angle photography with because they are static subjects. And then there's always a lot of fish in there. So you have a mix of good static subjects which are really colorful and like super wide. So it gives you time to play with the camera, and then that's probably the easiest wide angle subjects you can start with. But yes, as Ryan said, it's always difficult if you don't have good visibility. And then yeah, of course, split frames. I have I have tried a lot of times. I've never had a very good success with a proper split frame. It's one of the most difficult uh, shots which you can achieve in underwater photography because of mainly because of the exposure itself. Because you're not the moment, as I said, like the water sunlight goes inside, the exposure is gonna come down drastically, and then you also have a half of the frame which is exposed to the sunlight. So it's always a challenge to get that right. But yeah, you can actually check out Fake Guy's other photos. He has a lot of split frames. He's a master of doing that. But moving from these big subjects to the small ones, macro. So if you don't have the luxury of 20-meter visibility, what do you shoot? Just like me. We shoot small subjects. So there is beauty in everything. This is what something I was someone who was shooting wide angle constantly before probably 2019. But then I what changed for me was a trip to Anilao, Philippines. It's a macro paradise. Anyone who I will highly recommend, anyone who want to start with any kind of photography, that's probably the place to go. It it just gave me a different perspective. So macro is something which was not in my interest. Yeah, I used to shoot some nudibranchs when I was shooting wide angle. Yeah, when I see something small, yeah, you shoot and just move on. But then I realized like, yeah, it can be interesting too. So this subjects, as I said earlier, like you get to see things which otherwise you will clearly miss. And then it gives you a different perspective. I never knew these subjects can be this colorful and vibrant, and that they have their own marine behaviors. So that's something which really fascinates me about macro. So when I said macro, it can be anything. Like in this case, it's a size of your palm. These are called anemone fish, or we call it Nemo, from the movie Finding Nemo. They become really popular after that movie. But yeah, they always live on these corals, not corals, actually. They live on this anemone, which is also an animal, not animal. I'm really bad with the biology. But yeah, they also are living creatures. And then they live in a very symbiotic relationship. They are stinging anemone cells, and then anemone fish cannot get stung from these anemone reefs. So they always live in there. They give protection to these fish, where fish gives, like these fish eats a lot of, they are very messy eaters, and then they provide fish chunks or like whatever they eat uh, back to the anemone. And then they also keep these anemones clean from algae and all the other messes. So it's a very symbiotic relationship. You can see in almost every tropical places, these fishes, they are really playful. Like they probably are the seals of macro world. They always come to your like if you have a good if you have a dome port, or if you have something reflecting on your lens, if you give some time, they will always come there to play with your camera. So you can always find a good image out of these things. But that's now I'm talking about like 5-6 centimeters long. It can get smaller. So this one is actually, again, I shot it in one of the smaller islands in Singapore. It's called a dwarf cuttlefish. So usually cuttlefishes are quite big. They can get up to like 1 meter, like the giant Pacific. I think it can go up to like 50-60 centimeters. But in this case, these are dwarf cuttlefish, and they are like super, like they're one of the most interesting creatures I have shot here, because they change its color. They are super camouflaged. So especially if you're shooting a video, you can actually see them changing colors the moment they move. They are tiny too. This guy was about 3 centimeters long, so it's getting smaller. Um, so macro, what we are trying to do is to produce anything bigger than a one-to-one reproduction. So all the shots are taken with my 90mm lens. So any macro lens which will give you a smaller subject, the one-to-one reproduction on your crop sensor, or like on your camera sensor. So in this case, it's 3 centimeters long. It's almost camouflaged to the sand on the bottom, and it gets better from there. Then the third image is a nudibranch. It gets even smaller. So in this case, it's probably 2 centimeters, 3 centimeters long. This is Pikachu. It's commonly known as Pikachu because it reminds us of some parts of Pikachu. See, but I have, so like these guys, when they talk about, especially when I'm talking to divers, when they talk about scientific names and all that, all I remember is Pikachu and like the names cheesecake, nudibranchs, like the names which we made up, the divers make up. So the point I was trying to make is like you can get really amazing subjects. You can get different kind of subjects what you otherwise wouldn't have noticed. And this one is probably around 2 to 3 centimeters long. And then they are sitting on these hydroids where they usually eat and feed all the time. And then this probably exclusively live on these hydroids. So this is, again, 2 to 3 centimeters long, and it can get smaller. So this, when we get smaller than 2 to 3 centimeters long, we go into the category of super macro. So your macro lens itself cannot cover these subjects. What we do is we put an additional magnifier on top of your macro lens to get further magnification. So this shot, I shot this one with my 90mm macro lens, but on top of that, I have a 6x magnifier, which usually it's like a screw on like add-on lens, which you can put it on top of your housing, which will give you the magnification. And this particular guy, it's a very funny looking sea slug. It's called it's commonly known as Shaun the sheep or Shaun nudibranchs. So they're like super funny looking creatures, super cute, but very tiny. When I say tiny, it's like I think it's about 2 millimeter long. You can actually see the sand grains right next to them. So that's like I'm not putting any big sand grains there. This is the normal size of a sand grain, and then you're just closing in, focusing super close, and then you're actually magnifying how much ever. So you're testing your limits of your camera and your sensor and your lens. So at most of the times when you're doing super macro, your autofocus may not pick up it properly. So you usually switch it to manual focus. What I usually do is just switch it to manual focus and then put it into the closest distance and then move the camera front and back, because it's not that easy to manually focus underwater. You have to depend on some of the levers on your housing, which is not that friendly as just turning something on your lens. So I tend to put the lens into the closest focus distance and then just move the camera front and back to get that proper focus. But yeah, this is one of my favorite subjects anywhere I go, like usually in the tropics here in Singapore or like in Philippines. This is one thing which I always look for. They have different varieties. They always have this sheep-like face. So that's why we usually call them Shaun the sheep. But they are really funny-looking animals. And they also photosynthesize. That's another cool feature about them. So their body, they can actually produce energy without eating. They can just take convert sunlight into energy. So they're cool little creatures. But that's the difference between macro and a wide angle. Like you're shooting your subject in wide angle, like subjects which are 30, 40 like meters of size. And then here, when you're talking about 2, 3 millimeters of size. So that's the big difference between shooting the macro and then shooting wide angle. The challenge in underwater photography is you don't have the luxury of changing lenses, changing your settings on, like especially the lenses underwater. So you have to decide whether you want to shoot a macro or you want to go for wide angle in most of the cases. Like in this case, if I'm going down with a 90 millimeter lens, and if the whale sharks pass by or a dolphin comes nearby, there is no way I can shoot that subject. I'm just gonna wave at him and then just enjoy that time. But like probably I can shoot the eyes of the subject. That's probably the only thing which I'm gonna get with my macro lens. But yeah, the point is we have the challenge. We have that as a challenge. Like we have to decide what subjects you want to shoot. And most of the times, your dive guides or the local dive guides will tell you these are usually the things which you will see in these areas, and then you can plan for your dive and you can start with that particular lens. But that's about macro. Then we get like we talked about most of the stuff, and then I wanted to touch upon like as the last part of the last part of the session. I want to touch upon storytelling. What I meant by storytelling is like there is in any wildlife photography, there is two ways to photograph a subject. You can go down there, like let's say if you're going on a safari in Masai Mara, you can go down there and you can just shoot your subject and then just move on to the next one as a documenting kind of photography. You can always, I mean, there are people, when we all start out, that's how we always do. We go down when we are diving. Let's say I see a subject, I shoot it, and then I see if the subject is in focus, everything is perfect, and we just move on. We try to capture as many subjects as possible in a single dive. We try to see a lot of things in a single dive because you're excited when you're starting out with your camera. You want to capture a lot of things and you want to show it to your friends. So that's documentary kind of photography. Like you're documenting your subject, you're creating your memory, like what do you say? You're capturing that memory from your subject. Then the second way of photographing the same subject is what do you say? More of an fine art way of doing it. Like you're spending a lot more time with your subject perfecting the shoot. So, like, let's say if you're documenting a subject, you probably will be seeing like 40, 50 different animals in a single dive. Whereas when when you're trying to go for a fine art kind of photography, when you're trying to get some more artistic photography from the same subject, you probably will be spending the whole dive with the same subject. You might not move. In my case, like at least I usually when I do dive here in Singapore, I know there's like very limited number of things which you can see here. So when I find a good thing, when I find a good seahorse which is cooperative, I usually tend to just stick around. I stay there photographing the same thing again and again, trying different light angles. I try to position my lights in all different possible ways and then try to get something different. So to tell this kind of stories, there are certain things which you need to uh, practice or like you need to be good at. The first thing, of course, before going to the actual topics, you need to find the actual subject itself. You need to find a good animal which is ready to cooperate with your lights and camera and big housing, and then your dive gear making bubbles. So that's one hidden topic. I mean, one thing which you have to always keep in mind. If you find a subject which is not friendly at all, which is sitting inside a crack of coral reef, there is no way you can get a good photograph out of it. You can document it, but you will not be able to get a fine art photograph from it. So you just move on. You find another one. That's the first thing. And but coming to the first part of the technical aspects is the skill, like the technical skill itself. Like you need to be very comfortable with your camera. You don't want to be that diver who go down 15 meters and then you find your subject and you start to figure out where is your ISO settings are, where is your shutter speed is. So you need to be really good with your camera. Practice as much as possible on land. Practice where your buttons are, where the shutter speed is, where your ISO is, how to change your aperture, and like how to adjust all these things, whether it's on your camera or even with the housings. So, like every time I get a new toy to play with, like whether it's a housing or a light, I always shoot it at home. Like I tend to set up everything. I have some miniatures of adventure characters. I put them on my table, and then I try to photograph them from different places. And I just wanted to make sure that I know where the buttons are. You don't want to be that person who goes down and ask your dive guide, how can I change the settings? It's not always a good look. That's just one part of the technical aspect. The second thing is to get everything. Like you need to be this is not something which I can get into during this session. Like you need to be correct, like any techniques which you use, like in terms of composition or your lighting, and then all these things. It's not easy to cover in one small topic. So you can actually check out other MetaJungle workshops we had. I actually watched a couple of them, one from Jesse and the other one was from Subodh, and they talked really brilliantly about the composition part and then how to keep your subjects in place. And so those things applicable, like totally applicable in this scenarios as well. You need to be good with your photography. You need to be proper with your focus. You need to be right on with lighting and then subjects wherever you want to keep it. So the technical aspect is always number one. You need to have a sharp, like let's say if you're shooting a fish or a seahorse in this case, you need to focus. This focus should be on your eye. And like that, in that way, it gives you like it shows you that the animal is talking to your photograph. Then the second thing is the animal behavior itself. So what I meant by animal behavior is like actually Ryan touched up on this one a little bit when he talked about his sharks and sea lions. So like you need to know your animal, you need to know your fish, how they behave. The best way, as he explained, is to talk to your dive guide, talk to your buddies who are more experienced, then read about them. Like let's say if you know that you're going to, in this photograph, right? It's a pygmy seahorse. It's one of my it is my favorite subject to shoot. I've been on trips just to shoot seahorse, the pygmy seahorse. And then in this particular shot, this is one of my favorite shots because it's like probably the composition wise, it's proper. You can see that the seahorse, it's not an easy subject to find. They are one of the masters of camouflage. If you don't know where to look for these animals, there is absolutely no way you're going to find them in open water. So you go down when you're before the dive itself, you need to talk to your dive guide. You need to tell them that this is the subject I want to shoot and like tell me where I can look for. And then he probably will suggest, okay, yeah, this is the dive site where we have this particular Gorgonian corals. So these corals are called Gorgonian corals, and then these seahorses lives exclusively on these corals. So like you might have a huge area of these corals, and then there might be like one small patch of corals where all the seahorses are aggregated. So that is one thing, like you need to know where this fish lives. And then you also need to know how they behave. So in this particular case, like we went down on 20 meters and then we saw the seahorse, and I was very happy with this image. I was shooting and then taking my image. It was quite nice. Then my dive master, actually, my dive guide actually told me, stop, like, I was pointing him, okay, let's move on, let's move to another one. Then he said, no, wait here. I realized it after like 10 minutes why he asked me that, because once the current starts flowing in, the behavior of the seahorse and the Gorgonian fans around them, it changes. So like in this first image, everything is closed. The same sea fans it's like super closed and they are not feeding on anything. But then once the current starts flying in, the water becomes when there is a lot of movement in the water, there's a lot of plankton in the water, and then they open up the coral itself. They open up their polyps to feed from this current, and then once they start feeding, the seahorse changes its color to adapt to the bright pink polyps. So this is what I meant by, like, if I would have totally missed this opportunity to shoot this seahorse with a different color, it's the same seahorse in a different color and different environment, like 5 minutes or 10 minutes later to our dive. So that's one reason why I always say to learn about a fish, talk to your friends, talk to your dive guide, how they behave, how they change colors, or how they feed, or how they mate. All is important. Then, like, this is just another example. Like, these are called lemon gobies. You can always find them. They're super funny creatures. You will always find them in these hidden areas, like usually on the abandoned bottles or like. So first of all, disclaimer that I'm not a fan of any of this human garbage lying around in the ocean. Like, and none of us are very happy about it. But at least good thing is like you probably will get good photographs from it. So they live, quite a lot of them live in these abandoned bottles, glass bottles. You can find them. These bottles have been there for quite a long time. You can already see the coral growth on them, but they are very shy too. At the same time, you need to wait quite a long time in front of that bottle till they start coming out. So you wait for a long time. You need to be really patient, and then give them time to just get used to your big camera and then your big setup itself, because they need to make sure that you're not a threat to them. So just give them time, they will come out. And then not just they come out, they start behaving normally. Like in this case, that not the same fish, but like the same species of fish, you can see they are, I'm not sure if it's breathing or yawning or just cleaning their gills. They do this behavior every 5-10 minutes. So if you just give time to them, you will start seeing a lot of these funny things. So that's just something fascinating. Just start observing your subject, start to learn about it, and then see that you will definitely see something new. This No one actually told me that this is going to happen, but it's just happened in front of me. And then I thought, yeah, this is interesting. So the first time I missed it, then I just waited there, the same spot for another 5 minutes, and then just did it again. So you need to, so as I said in the early slide, your technical skills need to be perfect. Your focus need to be right on point, because you don't want to miss when they do something funny. You need to capture that thing. So that is another behavior which I was lucky to capture. Then the third point to this storytelling is to bring in your own signature. Like, bring some art to your photos. Like, for example, right, this image is a very clean background. I tried to eliminate all the backscatter. Everything is looks perfect. The photo is right on focus. Everything is lit up nicely. There's no backscatter to eliminate. It's almost like a studio-like photograph for me. But then I thought about it, and it's like, yeah, but I have taken similar image of the same subject at least 10 times before this. What is the point of taking another one? That's when you get a friendly subject like this, that's when you have to experiment with your photograph. And then that's when you have to break the rules. That's like the same subject. What I did is like I took a video light out of my housing, and then I placed it a little bit behind the subject, for lighting up all the backscatter in the water. What it gives you a lot of different effects. Like in the second photograph, for me it looks like a night sky, and in the first one it's just beautiful bokeh balls everywhere. So it's just the same subject, same place, photographing in different ways. It's just experimenting with your light and the camera, and then like there is a lot of ways to get these achieve these things. And then when you perfect, like this, in this case, I can say like the technique wise, it's perfect. Everything is on focus, but there's no special moment about it. Like I can see beautiful art, at least I can see it since I photograph, but like there's no special moment about it. So when you combine all three elements, like your technical focus, and then when your marine behavior, and then the art, you get like fantastic photos always. So that's what you have to. I've had that's one thing which I always look for. It. I've had like very few moments like that. The one with the pygmy seahorse, which I showed early. Then another one was a frogfish. They're quite not that cute looking. They are quite ugly, I would say. They always sit on these corals, and then they are predators. They always hunt. So I was actually waiting there to watch they hunt, but I was not that happy. I mean, I was not that lucky to just get that hunt. But I got everything in focus. What I did is I actually had this slates, which I usually use to just to write something to my friend, or just if I have to take a note underwater, we have this underwater slates. But on the other side of the slate, I have these glitters attached to it. So it reflects the lights, so you can see on the background. These are like fake stage backgrounds. So I just asked my dive guy to just hold that slate on the background, so I get my light, whatever I am pointing towards the subject, it actually reflects the glitters as well on my slate. So it's just, and like I just waited there till the frogfish started yawning. So it's one of those moments where everything gets correct. I mean, yeah, it's not 100% perfect image, but at the same time, like I get that feeling, yeah, I achieved something. Like there is some signature to it, like which I was able to bring in. There are some background which I was happy about. Then there is the focus is on the eye, everything is correct. And there's also some moment, that particular moment when the frogfish decided to yawn or whatever that behavior is. But yeah, that's just what I was going for. Like combine all three things, like bring in your own art into it, figure out what the marine behavior is, and then get the technical aspects correct. Another way to bring in, there are a lot of techniques to bring the art part to your image. This is probably another way. The first image is not properly shot because it was super deep, and the shark was quite a bit far from my subject, so it's not that sharp. But at the same time, I was trying to play around with the shutter speed. So these techniques, any of these techniques, whatever I said, told, you can actually test it out of the water itself. When you see a moving car or a moving bicycle, you can try with your camera. Try to shoot it with 1/20th of a second or 1/10th of a second. You might get a motion blur into your picture. In the first image, it was shot with, I think it was a single strobe, and now with the natural light. But I was actually shooting it in probably around that 1/20th of the second shutter speed, and then moving the camera with the shark. So what happens is it gives you a motion blur, which otherwise you will not get, and it gives you that feeling of, yeah, the shark is moving really quick. And in the second image, it's another technique we usually use. It's just a different way of photographing it. Uh, I've used two strobes, and then what I did is I actually, again, this is similar kind of shutter speed, 1/10th or 1/20th, and then you put it on rear curtain sync in your camera for your strobes, and then you click the button and then just rotate your camera. What it does is it gives you that swirl kind of effect all around the subject. But when the strobe lights your the subject, it actually makes the subject sharp. And don't get me wrong, these are not the first shots I took and everything came out perfect. I probably might have taken like 20, 30 shots just to get one in focus and everything aligned with what I want, what the way I wanted. So it's just, the key is just to practice it again and again. You can do the same practice on the surface, just put the subject and then just put the strobe or just the flashlight on top of your camera, and then just try to rotate the camera or just zoom in and out, then see different effects. Just break the rules which are conventional to the normal photography, and then see what exactly you can come up with. That's just another way to bring in some of your signature to the image. Then another way is to just get abstracts. What I mean by that is, like, you might not always have the subjects which are super interesting or very cooperative when they are facing you. You can always try something different. Like in the first case, it's a nudibranch. It actually owned by Alpha Triology, but this nudibranch image, it's I was seeing this nudibranch, and I know that this pink nudibranch, I've taken their photograph a lot of times. I have taken their front, back, side, every part of it. But then I realized, okay, yeah, let's try something different. I want to go get in closer to the subject. I want to go see how their gills look and how their naked gills look. So that's what I was going for. Again, I was using the same technique as like the slate in the background, so you can see some glitters on the background, which gives me like really nice bokeh balls. But yeah, that's just one of it. And the second image is from Brandon, and you can see instead of shooting the regular face of the shark as Ryan usually shoots, he went with just the tail, and it just it just gives you a different vibe, and it just gives you like, oh yeah, it's a majestic animal swimming away from you. It gives you like the vast, like it gives you a different perspective of from what we usually see. But yeah, that's just another way of doing it. And there might be some dives where you don't have any subjects, like you may not get anything to shoot at all. Like you might just end up with just the coral reef. And you might be able to come up with a very beautiful shot of the coral reef itself. So, and you might be able to see some behavior from the coral reef. So I've noticed that this was a hard coral, and then I've seen this very like the green color patterns on this. So I thought, okay, I'll just get very close to this corals and then see how it looks under super macro lens. And I was lighting this coral, and I realized after like 5-10 minutes the color changes, like it becomes like almost a fluorescent color. So these are like the behaviors which we are not really, it's more of an accident which you don't really know. But as I was saying, like, you may not always have a manta ray or a shark to shoot, but if you don't have anything else, there's always ground for practicing your shots, and you might probably end up with something really beautiful. But that's pretty much what I wanted to cover about storytelling. It's just about perfecting your focus, perfecting your technical skills, and then learning about the marine behaviors, bringing into your photography, and lastly, bringing in your own signature to your photography. Don't be afraid to break the rules. Don't be afraid to try something new. You might not be successful in the first attempt, but there's always practice, and then you might end up with something very unique for your own. So people, when they look at your photograph, they can, even if they don't know it was shot by you, they may, when by looking at the photograph, they may say, yeah, this shot was taken by Ryan, this shot was taken by Shinto. That's something which I feel is very like what is achievement. It's achievement by its own for a photographer. Yeah, that is pretty much what everything we wanted to cover. But at the last slide, I also want to I wanted to actually include the slide here, how we do common mistakes. This is a really important topic too, right? If you're still there, or
Yeah,
I
definitely,
just
mate.
put there.
Just just wanted to have a quick discussion about the difference between macro and wide angle in terms of what you do on a dive. A dive for a wide angle subject is generally a lot different than a macro. Um, do you agree?
Yeah, it is. So macro, I think I do quite a lot of, at least for me, I do quite a lot of planning before going down. I'm that one diver which have a lot of equipments with me. Like I always have a bunch of torches hanging on my PCD, and then like a dive slate in my pocket, and then probably a tripod in my other pocket, like a small tripod. But for planning itself, it's different because for a wide angle, you know that there is not a lot of things like artistically you cannot do, but at the same time, when I'm diving for macro, I know that these are the subjects which I might encounter, and then I know what lenses I have to use, and what all things I can take it down. And yeah, that gives me a little bit of advantage over bringing in that extra artistic feature which we were talking about. But yeah, that goes into my planning as well.
Yeah. And I think you get a little bit more time with your subjects.
Oh,
Macro in
a lot
general,
more.
you you might spend an entire dive focused on a singular subject. For a wide angle, you might get, if you're lucky, a pass or two from a beautiful creature, and you've got to snag your images in that one or two passes. It's two completely different
Yeah,
types of underwater photography, but yeah, still both incredibly rewarding.
absolutely.
Common mistakes. Yes. This is only a very, very small fraction of them, and I realize we're going a bit long in time. So, being underprepared, it's just an easy one to avoid. Come on, guys, get your shit together. Sorry about swearing. So, underwater photography, the more comfortable and the more relaxed you are in the water, the better photos you're going to capture. Showing up for a dive late or not having your equipment ready, anything along those lines is only going to stress you out and unnerve you, and you're not going to have as much fun or be as comfortable in the water. You're not going to capture as much image, like as good at images. So get your preparations ready. Charge your batteries, people. I can't repeat this enough. Charge your batteries. There's so many people that rock up to a dive and don't have charge batteries. Get it together. Charge your batteries. Another one I should put in here is getting overexcited and using all your batteries up in the first dive when you might have 3 or 4 dives in a day. Not much fun if you use everything up in the first dive and then you see these people sitting there poking around on their GoPros and etc. on the second dive, and they're already flat. And then on the third dive, you start to see all the incredible creatures. So yeah, plan your battery usage as well. Leaving the lens cap on, I've got to say, I've done this one too many times. You think it's all funny when you see someone on the land pull up their camera and try and take a photo when the lens cap's on. You have a good laugh. When you've just spent 45 minutes setting up your underwater housing and then you look inside and your lens cap's still on, then it's not as funny. But remove your lens cap. Rushing your camera setup. So this one's actually really important. It does take a while to set up an underwater housing. You can slap it together quite quickly, but an eyelash or a hair that's laying across an O-ring in the wrong way is going to lead to a leak, a failure, and a very, very, very expensive and very bad day for you. So take your time. Really take your time setting your camera up. Sit down in a nice clean environment, put on some nice relaxed music. I might put on a bit of electronic music like Deadmau5 or even some old school punk. Shinto, he likes a bit of Spice Girls. If you want to be my lover, that's his kind of style. Each to their own, you know. But as long as it's nice and relaxed, clean environment, nice and calm, and put your camera together slowly. Don't be rushed. I completely understand that that's not always an option. For instance, if you're traveling and you've just arrived on a red eye, but you have a dive in a couple of hours, it's not particularly easy to put your camera together. If you're going to be in those situations, I highly recommend getting a vacuum system where you can pull a vacuum on your housing and ensure that there is at least a good seal on it before you get in the water. So keep that in mind. Not taking a test shot. I did this one the other day and it was rather embarrassing. I set all my camera up and assumed it was all good. I got in the water. I swam a kilometer and a half to a location that I wanted to take some photos, and I went to take my first shot, and the flashes didn't go off. I quickly realized that the hot shoe wasn't on my camera properly, something that would have taken me only a couple of minutes to fix if I had taken a test shot back when I was back on land and made sure that the camera was focusing, it was taking an images, the memory card was in, the battery was full, and the actual strobe lights were both pulsing and taking a photo, but I didn't. So yeah, that was a pretty embarrassing one, and a lot of swimming for no reason. So again, a rookie error, but something that you should always just take a test shot. When you're in the car, set your camera up, take a quick shot. How about you,
Like
Shinto?
when
What
you're
other ones you got?
yeah, when you were explaining about each one of these, I could relate. I could actually think about the incidents when I had like exactly the same things. Like I know like most of us who are shooting underwater, I'm pretty sure like at least one of this or maybe most of this happened to them as well. If you guys notice my most of my Instagram or like any other places, my handle is itself is called flooded camera. It's not by choice. It was actually I flooded my cameras way too many times. Not just cameras, but like lights and so it's not a funny thing to have. It I mean, yeah, now it's funny to just talk about, but it's not interesting. It was a mistake by rushing into everything. Like probably I'll save the whole story for another incident. But like yeah, I was rushing to set up my camera, and then there was an O-ring sticking out, and then everything went upside down from there. So that's one thing. And the leaving lens cap on is also a funny mistake. The thing to remember is your camera is already inside the thing, so there is no way you can take out the lens cap. You can try to shake it, but it might not work in all cases.
I haven't tried
But
that one before.
it
Or
doesn't
there's a
work.
couple of buttons often on your lens that you can't access. So not putting it into autofocus or manual focus, whichever one you want to use during your dive. That one's always
Yeah.
a nasty one. And you get to your dive and you're
Yeah,
like,
but
oh, now I've got no focus. Ah.
this is also the reason why I chose the photo from Dan here, because I remember my first dive with manta rays. It was, I always say that like my spirit animals. I always wanted to see them, and then when I went on a first dive with manta rays in Maldives, I went down the like about 20 meters, and I started shooting, and I realized everything is black. I was not sure if my camera is not working, but it was too late to realize that the lens cap was there. But yeah, luckily I had the next day the same dive, and I was able to capture some good shots. But it's always not the case. But yeah, always take the test shots and then make sure. I always had incidents where I forgot to put in the memory card, and then you won't even realize that till you take the actual first shot. Your camera will tell you you don't have memory card. So it's all up there. All
Ouch.
these mistakes you can correct in the land, but you may not be able to do it underwater. You probably have to do it all this, practice it, and then just take that shot and before we move on. But I think with that, we have crossed the time, and I believe that we were able to cover quite a lot of things. I know it's not the best thing to cover in 2 hour session. I usually, when I'm teaching someone, it takes a day or two to explain these topics and then to practice. But I think I hopefully we made the most out of whatever time we had.
But if
Um,
anyone does have any more questions, feel free to send any of us a DM.
yeah. If not, I will hand it over to Emma or Rex if you guys have anything else to add. But otherwise, thanks a ton for MetaJungle for giving us the opportunity to just come here and talk about us and the photos and the crazy stories what we had.
And thank you very much for everyone for listening. It's much appreciated, whether you're listening live or listening on the stream. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys very much for this workshop tonight. It's been great. I always enjoy getting to learn more about underwater photography and the beautiful creatures that are lurking down there that you guys are able to find and capture. So definitely enjoyed getting to learn more when we hosted the gallery launch. And then I look forward to it every time. So thank you guys for the time that you put in. And of course, this is recorded. So we'll have it available in the workshop library. But it's been very enjoyable. And thank you to
It really
everybody
has
that
been.
attended too. Yeah, it's been great.
I appreciate you guys hosting this. It's much appreciated. And yeah, thank you, Shinto, for backing us up.
Absolutely. So thank you guys. And if anybody does have any questions, we definitely don't want to close before those are attended to. And so we have you're welcome to unmute your mic if you have a question, or you're also welcome to mention it in the workshop live chat channel. But
Yeah, I
I
was
appreciate
thinking
it.
it might be easy if
Yeah.
people just type Q in the workshop live chat if they have any questions. Or you can
Okay.
always DM them like they mentioned. But thank you, Shinto and Ryan. These pictures are amazing, and I see why you guys do this and why you love it so much.
Thanks for the kind
Absolutely.
words. It's much appreciated.
I don't see any questions coming in, so I think we're good.
Yeah. Yeah, we could. I can, like even later if I have if I see anything in the live chat, I can reply. I'll be on live for a couple of hours. So yeah, thanks guys.
That sounds wonderful. Thank you guys very much. And I think this has been a wonderful workshop. So appreciate the time and we'll look forward to the next event.
Thank you guys.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.